I'm Randy, Deputy Councilman, and I just wanted to thank you for coming tonight. We're going to have a really nice, intimate discussion about our overabundant deer population. And this is Brian Jump from the state of New Jersey, the Department of Environmental Protection, Fish and Wildlife Management. So I think Brian is here to help us with, I think, what some of us are considering a problem, or we've just noticed an uptick in the amount of deer that are in our town, in our yards, walking down our streets. So with that, I introduce Brian. So thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you guys for having me. I've been coming up to, thank you, appreciate it. How important is the mic for the folks that watch on YouTube? Okay, great. Yeah, so this is probably my 15th presentation in Bergen County. I pretty much just do presentations in Bergen County these days. I have 2 more scheduled in September, and I have 1 down in Ocean County coming up, and that's the only other one I've done this year. So Bergen County is a hotspot for deer issues, and I'm very happy to come up here and talk about my favorite animal. So we're going to start out with some background information, provide some context to the situation, and this is some similar background that I've been providing to other residents in Bergen County, other mayors and council members of different municipalities, so that we're all kind of approaching it from the same baseline information. So what does an overabundant deer population look like? I think it's things that everyone's going to be fairly familiar with in this room. But we can kind of break it up into these 3 categories. Human health, a big one that we're thinking about is deer vehicle collisions. We have, in New Jersey, have had some pretty severe deer vehicle collisions. I met someone who, their father was killed in a deer vehicle collision. Somebody swerved out of the way, and it was the person that killed them, not the deer, but in this case you can see the severity of that impact and how life-threatening that could be. Recently within your county, one had the idea to jump off a bridge into an interstate, and it happened to land through someone's windshield. A lot of deer packed into a tight area with a high network of roads, and deer vehicles collisions can be expected at a high rate. Tick-borne diseases, we'll talk about a little bit more in depth in a little bit. And then other deer-related diseases, less significant for the conversation today that we're having. Ecosystem health, so again, a little bit less significant for today's conversation because there isn't a whole lot of, specific to this borough, there isn't a whole lot of what I would consider natural habitat. There's a little bit. I did visit your couple parks on my way in, saw a couple deer, and took a look at some of the browse lines and potential damage from deer. It's certainly there, but I don't think that's why most people are in this room today, specifically talking about this borough, though it has very broad environmental implications statewide. And then economic impacts, and that's what I would kind of lump most of what we're talking about today. It'd be the human health discussion and the economic impacts. So for some context, provide some definitions. So in ecology in school, I learned these 2 terms. They're both assessments, but the social carrying capacity is basically looking at those 3 things that I just mentioned and considering, is this tolerable? It's an assessment, it's an opinion, and different residents, different public officials are going to have different opinions about what they can tolerate. Different species have different levels that we would tolerate. So something like a black bear, an immediate potential risk to human safety, we tolerate pretty low in terms of the amount of interaction that we'll have with those animals. Whereas something like a white-tailed deer, they have to be very abundant for us to become to the point where we think that those are exceeding our social tolerances for that animal's population size. I'll get out of the way quick. Usually, broadly speaking, we can associate the amount of damage, the amount of issues that we're having with the number of individual animals. There are cases where one individual animal might have a disproportionate impact on the local area. We'll talk about one of those deer in a little bit towards the end of the presentation. But for the most part, we can think as the more animals go up, we can expect more issues. And then there's the ecological carrying capacity. Again, not really what we're talking about, but an interesting context where ecological carrying capacity, we can kind of define as just the number of animals that we can cram into a given area. And so that is essentially the experiment in Bergen County, because there's little management occurring for the population. So we're kind of seeing both things occur at the same time in Bergen County. So again, for some context, I think it's important to kind of get a sense for why we're experiencing some of the things we are in Bergen County. What are some of the things that limit deer population size? So I'm trying out this new bucket. This is my new graphic. I think it's been helpful. You guys can tell me if it's not helpful. So at the top there, if you think about our deer population as essentially, the bucket itself is your burrow. The water line, the amount of water in the bucket at a given time, that is the deer population. So flowing into the bucket is the amount of births and the amount of deer immigrating into the burrow. And then there's a little hole at the bottom of the bucket. And the size of that hole is kind of the indicator of the death rate and the immigration rate. And so if you think about it, if there's twice as many cars on the road, they're driving just as fast, we can expect the deer vehicle collision rate to go up. And so we would see this hole in the bottom of the bucket widen, and we would expect on a given year, in a given snapshot of time, we would see the water line at a lower level because the birth rate moderately stayed the same, but deer vehicle collisions went up, and therefore the population is declining. So that roughly makes sense how the bucket works, the population. I used to do a way more complicated version. Just was losing people. So I like my bucket. So again, a little bit more. Why have deer become so overpopulated? So that bucket. So it's pretty interesting. This little graphic, it can look pretty subtle on these little time changes, but this little change right here, going back from 2015 to 1986, it's looking at the urbanization of New Jersey. So New Jersey is the most densely populated state in our wonderful union, and so we have a very high impact on the habitat in New Jersey. Loss of habitat is the biggest impact to most species, most endangered species, and not endangered species like the white-tailed deer. So believe it or not, white-tailed deer thrive in fragmented habitats. They like edges. So where a forest ends and a field begins, there's a lot of sunlight getting into that area, so there's a lot of forage capability. And now turn forest and meadow where there's predators and human hunting, and turn it into suburbia, where you have just as many light gaps, and in a lot of cases, people planting plants year after year. And so there's a lot of forage capability, but there's very few predators, and I'm including human predation in that, because other parts of the state where we have suburbia, but it's larger property sizes, there's some amount of human predation occurring in those areas, and that helps keep that bucket kind of in line. So everyone get a decent look at the urbanization of our state. We're waiting for 2025 to come out on that graphic. Will probably be 2023. I think that's the year they're working on for that map. So another sort of, I'd say this is actually a big part of this conversation. This is the same survey, just different maps. But this is a survey that was conducted in the city of Englewood, so nearby, fairly relevant. And all these little blue dots, I know that people in the back, it might be hard to see, but the bigger the dot, basically, and the darker the dot, that's the more deer that we're seeing on this given night. So they flew a drone survey over the town, and you can see where all of the deer were. And this map, I think, is very useful because this map highlights open spaces, green spaces. So in some cases, this is like a corridor around a highway that has some open space, but then a more major park, again, a more major park, and kind of a spattering of parks in here. And you can see that, generally speaking, the deer are living in and around those open spaces. So for everyone in this room, deer are a political, controversial topic, especially when you talk about management, which we're not explicitly talking about today. I think it's important to consider that if you're living in this red area, you're one of these neighbors, you're experiencing a deer population of about 121 deer per square mile. I did the math. Whereas if you're living in this area, you're experiencing 0 deer per square mile. Same borough, same votes, same voting privileges. And then if you live just generally in the township, you average it out, you're looking at, let me check my notes, 29 deer per square mile. So deer are not evenly distributed, and we should not expect that impacts from deer are to be evenly distributed. So as we continue this conversation, I'm going to keep harping back to that some of these techniques are going to be pretty effective for some of you, and you're going to go raving to your neighbors and to the people in your town, your friends, that, this product worked really well for me. Well, it's just a fact that maybe you're living in like this area where you're dealing with fewer deer, and you can impart less change on your little backyard habitat, and you could see a larger change because you're just simply dealing with fewer deer. Whereas the people living down here, usually they're just screaming for help from the government, just to be frank. They're looking for a bigger solution. So let's start talking about impact reduction. And I'm flying through this, so that's pretty good. We'll have a lot of time for questions. So impact, if I lose anyone along the way, just shoot a hand up. I'll answer questions as we go. But then if it's not like a clarifying question, if it's like what about tomatoes, we'll save that to the end, just so I can kind of keep my flow, which is flowing rapidly. So impact reduction techniques. And I approach this presentation as a deer biologist that largely thinks about deer at the population level. I'm not like Rutgers extension specialist who might field a lot of these calls normally. So I'm thinking about it from like a population level, and I decided to put that little spin on it, but just to keep that in mind. Probably the two most common for gardens and landscaping, hopefully everyone can read that all right, for your gardens and for your landscaping, the two most common solutions that you're looking at for mitigating those impacts are fencing exposures and then repellents. So for fencing exposures, the recommendation would be, and this will be on YouTube it sounds like, and I can provide some of these slides potentially. I'll have to just get confirmation. But generally speaking, a fence should either be 8 feet high, be narrow, as in a deer, if a fence is low, like a 6 foot tall fence, and it's a big garden, they will see that they can easily jump over and not risk hitting that other fence. If it's tight together, think of like a long narrow chute, kind of like the shape of this table, they're going to not really want to jump in because that fencing is pretty narrow. So does that make sense to everybody? So that's an or have a top. And with the top, you really need to make it like a maximum security prison. My friend tried to do the top, and they saw that little hole, got their nose in, and they just kind of jumped in and flattened the fence. So that's Megan. That's my colleague. We come from far away, and there's lots of traffic. I had the insight to come hang out at a Panera nearby. So.
The GPS told me I was going to get here at 6:20.
Yeah. So those are kind of options for fencing exposures. Effective if maintained. And then I didn't actually make this point here, forgot, but local ordinances do affect fencing. And then there's also options for if you're just planting landscape trees, that they do sell tree tubes that can help prevent like buck rubs and some amount of browsing as they're short. Is there anyone unfamiliar with what a buck rub is? We can cover it. I'll just say, a buck rub is when they rub their antlers on a tree, it can just kill the tree. So it's a breeding behavior, they're leaving scent on the tree, but they can really go at it. Like an elk will just completely take it out. But a whitetail, they'll rub up and down, it'll kill the bark. In some cases, it can lead to infection and kill the tree, or just mechanically destroy it. So that's where a tree tube can be helpful. And some people do fence their entire property for deer. That being said, Bergen County has a big issue with fencing that deer can jump over, will try to jump over, and has the little like spikes at the top, and deer will get hung up on those and be waiting for someone to come euthanize them. So please, do your research. That's extremely common. Likewise, this chain link fence, I've seen this, where a deer will jump over it and their hoof can fit through that. And likewise, you can imagine the injury that would occur when their leg goes through and their body goes over. So, fencing, not always ethical, honestly. Not every fence is created equal. You have to put some thought into it. An 8-foot fence is good for most deer to not jump over. But you can imagine, one of the themes that I'll be talking about in a little bit is imagine if everyone did this thing that I'm recommending. If everyone in town did this thing that we're recommending, one, this would look like a dangerous country in the Middle East with every property having an 8-foot fence. But ultimately what you're doing, we'll save some of that conversation for a little bit. So repellents, they're short-lived without reapplication, so you just need to make sure you follow those guidelines. Forage availability will limit your performance. So what I mean by that is that deer are preferential browsers, and actually, maybe I'll skip ahead just to allow me to skip quite a bit ahead. Sorry. Okay. So I'll go back. My first time doing this exact presentation, so I'll move this slide in the future. But so forage availability is basically a product of deer's preferential browsing times the number of deer that are preferentially browsing on a given item. So here we have this like little scientific experiment that I think kind of visualizes it pretty well, where scientists are looking at, well, which plant in the labeled bucket do the deer prefer to browse on? So if you guys are garden and you have landscape plants, you know that they hit the hostas, you know that they hit, whatever else, arborvitae, if you have those. So they preferentially browse. But after a period of preferential browsing and some amount of human behavioral changes, that will actually change the forage availability. And so kind of what I'm trying to get at is that as things in the neighborhood are browsed, and year after year, the deer population on a theoretical level, let's just say, it continues to go up. Maybe it just stays at a really high level. Either way, deer will affect their landscape. They eat about 7 pounds of forage, or 7% of their body weight daily in leafy or woody material. So that's a lot of food. I might have actually mixed that up. Let me say 4%. I think it's 7 pounds is my estimate, so apologies. I might have actually mixed that up. Let's say ballpark 4% of their body weight. I think on average that comes out to 7 pounds, so that should be pounds, not percent. So apologies for that mix-up. So they're eating a lot, and if they're preferentially browsing a lot, they're going to change the food availability, and then that therefore will change how well those repellents are actually working. So we'll come back to this slide, but just to kind of finish up talking about this. So let's imagine that you spray a chemical product. Now let's look at the chemical products. So this is a study that was conducted, I think it was in 2010. Yep, 2010. And it looked at some of the most commonly used repellent products that were on the market at the time. They looked at a lot of different things, but basically they just put plants out, the same plants out in front of, they were using yew, I think, in this study, in front of different densities of white-tailed deer. And they basically used a yew that was a yew plant, for those of you who aren't familiar. They put some of them behind a fence as like a physical deterrent. A deer cannot get to it. And basically they rated the performance of a given product against that 100% working physical barrier. And so this particular product, Bob X, they had a score of 93 out of 100, we can think of it as. So in this study, it was quite effective. However, let's get into the weeds with it. No pun intended. No repellent was 100% effective in reducing browse damage. And in general, in this study, in this region, which is important, the egg-based products, so it smells like rotten eggs, which might rotten egg smell on your plants, were most effective. And so I kind of theorized that in areas that, one common alternative is spraying coyote urine, which is there. I kind of theorized that coyote urine might work better in some of these like southern states where deer are being predated upon by coyotes on a regular basis, and so they might be more afraid of coyote urine in that context, whereas here in the Northeast, they'll kill sick white-tailed deer, they'll try to kill adult deer, it's pretty rare, and they'll kill a lot of fawns, but I don't really see deer reacting super negatively to seeing a coyote. I haven't observed that. Usually they're just aware and they'll kind of hold their ground. So I kind of hypothesized that might work better. That being said, in this particular study, these were the products. So this is a product list I can provide after the presentation. And an important reminder that you have to follow their label, this particular label of, you know, the best one in this particular study. You have to apply at different intervals based on how much it rains and what time of the year it is, and a little bit reactively to what the deer are doing. But point being with all of this is that if all of your neighbors apply, that's the scaling up principle. If you scale this up, everyone applies Bob X, then all of your, the plants that were the most palatable, they just are in a different order of palatable, and so palatability is always relative to what's available. And so deer are going to eat what they need to eat to survive, and we'll continue this conversation a little bit, but this is, I honestly just thought was an interesting video. I might have to jump ahead. So this is sorry, let me talk about it. So some people use deer soap or even like an off-the-shelf soap bar to prevent deer damage to trees. I thought this was an interesting video because this one showed another kind of unintended consequence of it. Oh, we're actually rolling. Let me see. I need to jump to see if I can do this. There we go. Hold on. Not a deer. Yeah. Let me see if I can make this work. Might have to do it on this screen. Well, anyways, there's a really good part of the video I wanted to show where he's really wailing on it. But the skunk tries to eat the soap bar. And so, there you go. So, I thought that was pretty rich. Just keep in mind, when you're putting out scents, in some cases, the scent is repelling one animal and attracting another animal. And I'm sure skunks are quite abundant in your municipality. So, just more so thought that was pretty amusing. But, so yeah, so then continuing that conversation where palatability is relative to what's available. So this on the right is a picture, this is called rock tripe. It's a type of lichen, and in more harsh of winters, deer will actually begin to browse on rock tripe, and so I suspect from this picture, I regret not taking the picture myself after I did watch a deer one harsh winter eat rock tripe. So this was just pulled from the web, but I suspect this area where it looks like the lichen was browsed back a little bit is from deer. I can't 100% say with certainty, but this is what it looked like. Anyways, point being that deer will start to eat worse and worse foods as the good foods become less and less available. So a repellent is just encouraging them to do a different action, but if they're hungry, they will eat what does not taste good, but what keeps them alive. So I've been trying to make that point for about 4 minutes. Does everyone kind of follow my zigzagging train of thought on that one? Cool. So that's deer repellents. So let's talk about tick-borne diseases. So get the pictures out of the way. This is a black-legged tick or a deer tick. That's the type of tick that can transmit Lyme's disease. I would say, the most prevalent and important prevalent tick-borne disease, but there's a lot out there. And then this is a deer that is pretty severely affected by tick loads. I have pictures that I don't put in my presentations of fawns that were killed by ticks, which is like pretty remarkable amount of parasitic damage. But you can see just the amount of scarring on this deer's ear. Pretty significant. So this is a big one to understand for some of that population level background. So in several studies, it's not just one study, several studies have shown that deer populations positively correlate with tick populations. That means that sure, question?
Do ticks survive the winter?
Yes, yeah, ticks will survive the winter. Yep, so then, like I'm outside often, on a warm day in the winter, I'll get a tick pretty regularly. And unfortunately, I mean, that's a climate change conversation. We're having milder and milder winters. So ticks are actually forcing, as a little aside, fun fact, this one's free. The ticks are actually forcing moose populations northward because as climate change helps with tick activity and some amount of tick survivorship in the winter, moose are getting higher and higher tick loads to the point where they're dying from the amount of ticks. And so it's actually pushing moose populations north faster than simply like what their body condition and like forage capability and just habitat concerns would otherwise be doing under the same conditions. So, little fun fact, we're not really talking about moose though. So when I say that deer populations positively correlate with tick populations, correlation, we say in the industry, correlation does not equal causation. That being said, in several experimental studies conducted on islands or in closed populations, they reduced the deer population and the tick population decreased following that. So deer are extremely important, not for the actual spread of Lyme's disease itself, but ticks as adults feed on large mammals to get a large blood meal. That's why you see this engorged tick right here. They get a large blood meal, and then they have the energetic resources in order to drop off and lay their eggs, produce eggs and lay their eggs. So without abundant large mammal populations, a tick that's just hanging out on a leaf, they're just waiting to come in contact with this large mammal to get that large blood meal. And in actuality, for a tick to go through its full lifespan, it actually needs to have several different hosts, one of which are usually mice or other small mammals, as they're very small. And so for a tick to actually transmit someone Lyme's disease, they're actually getting that from mice. It's not from deer that are holding Lyme's disease. A small tick, usually in its second life stage, I believe, if memory serves me correctly, will feed on a mouse, fall off after a certain time, grow up, and then it's usually later life stages that will attach to a human and then give it Lyme's disease or some other disease. So, but I think important to this conversation that the more deer there are in a given area, you can expect to have more ticks because they're an extremely important vector. A given area will just not have the same biomass of mammals of like fox as it will deer because of their varying diets and life histories and whatnot. So, does that make sense? More deer, more ticks is expected. Little fun fact. Who's heard this one? Fact or fiction? High possum populations reduce tick populations. Anyone heard that before? Okay. Well, I sometimes hear it that we need to release more possums. This is actually a pretty erroneous fiction. So a study basically was conducted where they just provided possums, a captive possum, ticks to eat, and it ate them. And that was it. It ate what was available to it. In reality, they're not seeking out ticks, which are an extremely small and difficult insect to find. They're eating whatever insects they could find. And so while it's potentially possible there is some small population level impact on possums or having on ticks, it's not been demonstrated. There's no real founding in that. That's a bit of a pipe dream. Also, possums are the only animal in New Jersey that just wander. They don't have a home range. They just walk wherever they please on a given day. So you can't just drop a bunch of possums in town and expect that they're going to stay there either. Sure.
The chickens do an excellent job removing ticks.
Sure, yeah, and where they have access to, yeah. Yep, but scale up the chicken idea, and we have issues with rats and probably foxes and whatnot. So, yeah, I love chickens. I have chickens. So, I just borrowed this straight from the CDC because it's a disease, and I think we should hear from the actual experts on this. So nowhere to expect ticks, so just understanding their biology. Essentially, it's if you exit your low-cut lawn and you get into anything thicker than that or higher than ankle-high vegetation, that's where ticks will tend to hang out. That being said, they could very well be in your lawn as well, but that's where you can expect them the most. The CDC encourages you to treat your clothing and gear. I have friends, and I've previously used a product called permethrin. Again, I could provide this. You could send it to a company and they'll treat it for you, or you can spray it, you leave it for 24 hours and it kind of soaks into your clothing. I'm not a big fan of chemicals personally on my clothes, but permethrin works extremely well. Avoid contact with ticks, kind of no-brainer, but a little behavior goes a long way. If there's an open trail or there's the path through the weeds, usually just pick the open trail. So regular insect repellents will work. There are some that you spray on you, just for ticks. Treat and check. I'm reading what I'm thinking. Treat and check your pets. So I'm not a dog owner or a cat owner currently, but I am aware that some people treat their animals for ticks. But you really need to check them as well. And just the reality is, if you have a cat coming in and out, or if you have a dog coming in and out, they are not going to be behaving in any tick-friendly way. They will be bringing them back into your house. And so that really just means that you need to check yourself. And amazingly, what I forgot to put on the slide is check yourself. You just need to check all the time. So if you went out into the garden or you went out into the backyard and whatnot, when you come back inside, check your clothes and then take off your clothes and check. If you have a significant other, have them check you out naked. It's worth it. Lyme disease is a life-altering disease, so checking yourself for ticks is probably the best possible thing you can do. Another thing I didn't put on here, there are companies that will come out and treat for these things. So that's a potential option as well. It's not something that, Fish and Wildlife would necessarily recommend or recommend against. That would just be based on consultation with a given company. And then coming to a big one, I think this is pretty important for suburbia, is this one's the only one I put in all caps, you may notice. Stop feeding them. They do not need your help. So I think this is pretty big, and I don't say it lightly, and I don't say it without empathy or consideration of what people are thinking when they feed deer. But you are not being a considerate neighbor if you're feeding deer. You may like these wildlife on your property, but they are getting there from other people's properties. And they are existing not just on your property, they're existing in the areas surrounding your property. So what you do on your property with wildlife, simply put, does not only affect you. So they do not need our help, and in fact, you could be, if you feed them enough, you could be unnaturally increasing their birth rates, and so you take a problem that is at one level, and now you're artificially feeding them. And sure, are they happy to eat? Of course they're happy to eat, and I'm not going to go along this kind of scare tactic of saying that everything you feed them is going to shorten their life. They're pretty resilient animals. Honestly, they're herbivores, but they're even moderately omnivorous. They could eat some pretty bad stuff, and I don't think it would drastically shorten their life. So I'm not going to go down that camp. They'll kind of get used to what you feed them, but you're not being a good neighbor. You're taking a problem that's already pretty big, and you're making it even bigger. You could, remember that bucket? You could be increasing the birth rate at the top of that bucket. So this is an important one. So where it could be harmful for the deer is that you're kind of encouraging them to partake in unnatural behaviors. So if your property is across a road from where the deer beds or sleeps during the day, you could be increasing the frequency wherewith it's crossing roads. And it could be leading deer by teaching them that humans are associated with food, and especially if you're feeding them by hand, please do not do this. They are wildlife, they're potentially dangerous animals. You're telling those individual deer that that people are more like deer than they are something like a predator, and so that increases their habituation. And sure enough, in New Jersey, I went looking into it, we have had several attacks. This is an interesting one in Sussex County where a deer known as Melvin, who was being fed by local residences, lost its fear of people and attacked this guy on the morning of his wedding and pinned him to the ground for several minutes. This is a young man at the age to be married, so he was strong enough to overcome this buck, which have antlers that gore people. But for elderly residents, this is a different situation. He might have laughed it off a little bit potentially, or something. I don't know. I'm not him. I don't know how he felt about it. Deer will attack people, especially if they lose that fear. So it's the fight or flight instinct. Every time you interact with a deer and teach it you're more like another deer, deer fight each other. They attack each other. Moms hove their young when it's time to send the young away because they want to have new young. All of these behaviors. Bucks obviously use those antlers to fight each other pretty aggressively. And of course, if you're one of the people in the room that are interested in feeding the deer because they're so cute and they look so hungry, this deer obviously crossed a pretty serious line by doing that, and he was shot by police, and I think appropriately so. We would actually just recommend that most townships just adopt a no feeding of deer ordinance. In places like in the western half of your county, it should probably be no feeding of wildlife ordinances. That includes things like black bears. If you have bird feeders, and especially if you live somewhere where there could be bears, although obviously deer like bird seed too, you could take your bird feed in and out every day. Deer are crepuscular, they come out mostly at dawn and dusk. And so you could put your bird feed out when birds are most actively looking for food. And some people will put a little tray underneath that they can clean up before and after. That's most often being done in places that have bears. So my parents live in Morris County, that's where I grew up, and they, unfortunately, after years of feeding years of feeding birds, they had a bear come and rip it down. So they had to stop putting out their bird feeder.
I'm monumental historian. We need to read. It's very great presentation.
No problem at all.
Just received the notice. I'm sorry I didn't hear the chance to ask my question. I asked Randy about it.
Sure, we can answer some.
There it is. You can watch the rest of
Thank you so
it.
much.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and you could send her emails. I'll answer emails.
Thank you.
Very polite exit. Sure.
Like, before you move on. So you mentioned, the young man was able to fight off the deer. We did unfortunately have a situation where an older gentleman was injured and hospitalized by a deer because the family in the neighborhood that fed the deer every day went on vacation, and the deer was looking for handouts and approached a 91-year-old gentleman getting out of his car in his driveway and attacked. And he ended up having a couple of broken ribs. He was hospitalized. It's a serious thing. Are they cute to look at? Yes, but the reality is they are a wild animal and they are listed as would be lists. Also going off the biology part of it, deer's, their gut actually changes based off of the season. So if you're constantly feeding them corn every single day, after corn is no longer a natural food for them to find, their gut biome has changed and you can do more harm than good in your winter feedings. So they were here before us, they'll be here after us, they don't need our help at the end of the day. So the feeding thing is definitely one of the main things that we get calls and complaints about. And most people are frustrated that like our hands are tied, there's nothing that we can do. It's up to local ordinances and for you guys, like Brian said, to be good neighbors. So just piggyback off of what Brian said. But.
Yeah, and talking about that a little bit more, you know, being a considerate neighbor. So I just got a call from somebody down in South Jersey, and he and his neighbors are having an issue because the one neighbor of theirs feeds the deer, and the other neighbors just want to have a garden. And so the biology of a deer is we call it browsing for a reason. A deer is not going to like go into like a patch of like red oak saplings and just like methodically go to red oak, red oak, red oak, red oak until there's no red oaks left. They're going to browse in kind of a meandering line, and they're going to continue on to whatever destination, if they had a destination in mind, and they're going to browse as they go. And so for these neighbors of these people that are feeding the deer, they're not just going and eating the corn there or whatever it may be. They're feeding on what they find along the way. And so you're not just affecting your own property. They're not your pets, it has larger consequences. I get it. I love deer. So again, I don't want to seem like I'm not being empathetic. I would almost wish that the world was different, but it's not. These are, like Megan said, potentially dangerous animals, and they cause a lot of destruction. More or less some closing thoughts here. This is that topic that I already kind of brought up, but I think it's worth kind of mentioning as like a parting thought. So if you adopt any of these techniques at scale, you start to run into issues with efficacy or issues with other potentially unintended consequences. So for here, let's say we all fence. Well, the areas that are not fenced, if the deer density is the number of deer divided by the amount of area that they're in, the more and more fences that go up, you're actually increasing the effective deer density in the area where they do have access to. So you'd expect to have even higher damage, and if you really scale it up, you could expect to have actually some pretty unhealthy deer because they've lost a large portion of their range. And deer, they're not migratory in New Jersey. They will stay and starve. They will not go find food. So just keep that in mind. Preferential browsing is relative. I kind of said that for a while before, but they'll continue to find the most palatable food available. If everyone starts spraying with the egg food, then egg food's for dinner. Tick populations are expected to rise as deer populations rise. And this is kind of a fun one. I kind of alluded to it previously too, but reductions in deer vehicle collisions can increase population size. So I didn't really talk about avoiding deer on the roadways. Really, it's just drive slower, especially at crepuscular hours when you can't see as well. If you're a municipal official, you might not reduce the number of deer vehicle collisions, but you can reduce the severity by enforcing speed limits. But if you do that, that's a very critical part of that bucket, is the deer vehicle collisions up here. So if you decrease the deer vehicle collisions, then more and more does will live more and more years and be reproducing more and more. So that could potentially increase the deer population size. And more of a philosophical thought, I like this quote from a study I read a while ago. It was a survey conducted. But just as dirt can be thought of as matter out of place, animal pests have been described as animals perceived in inappropriate numbers or in the wrong context. And I kind of like to think about this because, like I said, deer are my favorite animals. And I talk to a lot of people that have a lot of animosity at deer. And I think the reality is that people, generally speaking, love them if they weren't having so many issues with them. So this is a little reminder that these things, what we're experiencing is just something rather unnatural. It's not the deer's fault. I would say it's our fault as land managers, effectively, intentionally or unintentionally. This perception that they're this pest, it's simply a product of their population size. So with that, I provided the councilwoman my business card, so I could take emails and stuff like that, but that's what I have for today. I'm happy to take as many questions as we want. Sure.
I got 3 actually.
Okay, great.
Really quick. I was wondering if the deer poop, and you didn't really talk about the diseases of the deer as far as like CW.
Yeah, I could talk about CWD a little bit. I don't think it's
CW something?
CWD,
But
yep.
if a lawnmower goes over the deer poop and it stays on an infected deer, can that be aerosolized and affect humans? That's
So,
one question.
yeah. I'll answer it. Yeah, I'm going to forget. My memory's not that good. So chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is essentially, has everyone heard of mad cow disease? So it's a prion disease. Also, another common one is Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. So it's a prion disease or a protein-based disease. Specifically, chronic wasting disease is only in cervids or species of deer, like moose, elk, caribou, deer. And so it's kind of, my professional opinion would be that it's inevitable to be in New Jersey in the next number of years. It is not currently known to be in New Jersey. So Pennsylvania got it probably by movement of captive deer from across the country to Pennsylvania. They decided not to depopulate the captive deer, touch noses with the wild deer, and it's been spreading slowly but exponentially across Pennsylvania. So the reason why people like yourself maybe care about chronic wasting disease is because it's so similar to something like Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease or mad cow disease, which, if memory serves me, approximately 2 million meals of mad cow disease infected beef were consumed by people across the world, mostly in Europe and the U.S. And a few hundred or a few thousand. You can Google it. A number of people were infected by mad cow disease, and these prion diseases are 100% fatal if you get it. It's a long incubation time. You have a number of years living normally, but then it's 100% fatal. And so the concern that a lot of people have is, will it cross the species barrier from deer to human? And so I would say, from like poop, fecal material, extraordinarily unlikely, because scientists have done studies where they like fed monkeys like a lot of chronic wasting disease infected meat, and one did end up getting it. So it's theoretically possible that a human potentially could, though it's never been found to or proven to. But it takes a lot of exposure for that one little prion to get in the right place in your body, and it's by consumption. So,
We don't know if it could be spread by the.
I'm saying,
or chopping up the-
I think it's going to be extremely unlikely. Now, could that potentially increase the likelihoods of a white-tailed deer to get it? Right now, I'm saying we don't have it in New Jersey, so I don't want to make anyone think that we have it currently. On a theoretical level, I could see a situation where chronic wasting disease prions which exist for almost indefinitely, can survive 700 degrees of heat, could be in that fecal material and then get chopped up by a lawnmower. And studies have found that CWD will be uptaken from the soil and into a plant, and then a deer browses on the plant and gets chronic wasting disease that way. So if you are spreading it like that, I can see it as plausible for a deer, but you even walking barefoot with a cut on your foot through your yard, I think, to me, my understanding of the disease and the fact that no one's ever gotten it, and millions of people eat deer every year in the United States, and no one's ever gotten it, I think it's extremely unlikely. Sorry, that was a long answer. But you got two more questions, right?
Yeah, the other one is, what density of deer would support actually being taken by your organization or a hunt?
Yeah, so,
Or,
yeah, density's tough. We recommend municipalities manage their deer populations based on feedback from constituents. So that's like that ecological carrying capacity versus the social carrying capacity. I alluded to it a bunch, but there's limits to these mitigation techniques working at a population scale when the population gets so high. I don't think you shouldn't try it, protect your personal interests, but it's not solving the population level issue. And the reality is, for some people it's an uncomfortable truth, for some people it's a little bit more comfortable but difficult, is that this is the first time in thousands of years that deer have not been hunted by humans in Bergen County. That's just a simple reality. So humans are the keystone predator and have been for 50,000 years, but in the U.S. about 10,000 years, Native Americans living here. So we had documented tremendous impacts on white-tailed deer populations. So obviously we can't even talk about releasing a mountain lion in Bergen County. That wouldn't work. So it would be some amount of human predation. There's advances being made, though still pretty unviable on things like fertility control, but it's a conversation we could have another night. Essentially, without human intervention, currently the only human intervention that's being imparted on deer are deer vehicle collisions. So it's entirely accidental, and it's not happening in what I would say an ethical way.
no figures in place if the deer population gets to a certain level within a certain square radius or whatever.
No, that's for a municipality to determine their own tolerance. So we have places in the state that have higher deer populations, but because they do have active management, the issues with those populations are lower. They're not in people's backyards as much. So, biologists recommend in an ecological setting a certain number, but it doesn't really apply to you because your township isn't a natural habitat. Does that make sense?
Is it ever defined for a setting like Bergen County, what would be acceptable and not?
It would, our recommendation, generally speaking, would be that Bergen County is pretty severely behind on population level management. Deer, as they exist in these suburban, almost ex-urban habitats that we're in here, white-tailed deer, there's this theory called the rose petal hypothesis, and it's basically boiled down to that a matriarchal female, or a grandmother, she'll be kind of leading a little group of does around. And so as long as there's a doe to lead the other does that she offspringed around, you're going to see increasing levels of comfort of deer in those areas, because that's just where they live and their mom taught them to live there, so they're even more habituated to it from a younger age. They're better at crossing roads. And so if you don't manage those populations, this kind of founder effect where deer are kind of learning to live in increasingly urban areas. We just did a survey at like Liberty State Park, which is like in basically Newark. And so, they're able to live in some pretty wild habitats and some pretty poor condition. So, no, we don't really have a blanket number. You won't find that anywhere in the U.S. Every state agency recommends based on people's tolerance with the animal. A farmer has low tolerance because they have a high economic interest. Sometimes just regular citizens have a higher tolerance. And it's balancing that. It's a tough thing. And like I said before, with that map, one person in the town is living in a dramatically different situation from a deer population standpoint than somebody on the other side of the town. So us setting that threshold, I almost don't like, these drone survey capabilities because it makes conversations really challenging when somebody can say, well, the deer population was as high as this here. And that's, in some cases, it's inaccurate, and at best, it's spotty. It's different people in town are experiencing different things. So it's a tough conversation, but, and I don't want to give you an easy answer, Sure.
If you know, how many towns or counties actually have no feeding ordinances?
That'd be tough to look up. I might ask AI to tell me that. Maybe it would know.
We do.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I think some of the residents aren't aware of that.
Yeah, so it would be...
The other issue that comes along with other issue that comes along with the no feeding ordinances is your township's willingness to enforce them.
Yeah.
If any of you have ever heard of Holiday City in South Jersey, that's the prime example that always comes to my mind when we talk about this. There's a woman in Holiday City who literally calls herself Snow White. She has the deer on a schedule, and the deer know when to come up to her back door to get fed. They have a no feeding ordinance. Their township won't enforce it. She has a whole Instagram page. You can go watch her feed her deer, and the township won't do anything about it.
We've done it.
Okay,
Well,
that's good.
so that's good.
Yeah.
So then that turns into, that turns into a sticky situation too, because then it turns into, oh, well, so-and-so told on me that I was feeding the deer, and it turns into, social issues.
Yeah.
But most of the time, if you call the township and you go, this is becoming a problem, I want to remain anonymous. 9 times out of 10, they're usually pretty good about it. I grew up in a small town, so everybody always talked about everything anyway. But that's honestly the enforcement part of it is the biggest thing. But there are a lot of townships that do have no feeding ordinances now, especially I think after us moving with them and stuff. That's become, and it's more the urban areas too that tend to have them, because then those deer in your backyard are your deer. They're not like the deer in central and South Jersey that have to, walk 14 miles in a day to eat. They can just go from Susan's backyard to Greg's backyard, to Steve's backyard, and then they can go back to Susan's. It makes management harder, for sure. And that also feeds into that, well, how many deer do you want to save? So it moves back. Everything's connected, but like Brian said, there's no magic number for, it depends on the cultural carrying capacity, how many deer you guys want to have in the area.
So I think a gentleman over there had a question first, and I'll get to you.
I'm Bill.
Hi, Bill.
Upper Saddle River, I had some newspaper clippings a number of years ago. They had 4 hunting sessions of bow and arrow. Each year they took out 110, 130. I have a friend that lives up there. He sees at least 9 to 11 deer on his property. So, and numerous car accidents. So right now, I came across a statistic that in New Jersey, 30,000 accidents with deer in 1 year. I used to live down in West Virginia at school down there and everything, and those hunts, I checked some numbers last year, 111,000. Pennsylvania, the total number of deer that they have in population is 1.5 million. And they took out 476,000.
In New Jersey, hunters harvested approximately 39,000, just under 40,000 in New Jersey.
More likely, from your experience, would that be down in South Jersey where the pine barns?
It happens everywhere. We have different maps, and she's the regional biologist, so she has a better idea. Yeah. But yeah, essentially, in Bergen County, it's incredibly few. It's on the order of a few hundred. Largely Saddle River, who is taking a concentrated effort on private properties. And then you have places like, I'm going to forget some of my town names, but near Ringwood State Forest, and the Bergen County Park up in that western area. They just have larger property sizes, so there's a good amount of harvest that occurs in those towns every year as well. Monmouth County, Hunterdon County, Sussex County, Middlesex and Mercer are usually our top counties for harvest. So it is largely actually those central. Yeah, that's where the habitat's the best, and that's where suburbia is the most sparse and kind of the right mix to host a lot of deer, but also allow a lot of access. And so that's typically where we have the highest harvest.
So, just number-wise, put it in perspective, Bergen County as a whole took 179 deer last year. Sussex County took 3,735. Hunterdon was the highest at 6,590, and they still have deer problems.
Yeah, so it's a product of access. It's that conversation about access. So hunting is obviously a very difficult conversation in this town. You have one woodlot essentially. So that's a different conversation. We're kind of the purpose of tonight is to talk about mitigation. We could do a whole nother night on management, and it'd be complicated in this town.
What I've been correct in saying, I've lived here since 1966. At the south end of town on the road, just up from Newbridge, the timber stand is on the bridge by the synagogue up there over the years, and there used to be one in Teaneck where the field is now. It's loaded with deer, and what I've noticed over the years, the understory is just completed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, since the deer feed on the seedlings, the saplings, the bark, and by burns and other plants, berry bushes and such, and the other story, when that's depleted, is that the reason why they're coming to
No.
family out on a Friday night and
Yeah, no.
neighbor's house?
I would say yes and no. Ultimately, deer reproduce annually. So if they could all stay in this woodlot, then they could. But it ultimately, bucks, they disperse randomly. So mom kicks them out before the rut so they don't interbreed with mother and son. And so she'll hoof the son and they disperse randomly. The does, the mom will kick them out in the spring so that they're not competing and attracting potentially coyotes to where their new fawns are laid in the grass. Some number of them will stay wherever they went after their mom kicked them away. A lot of places it's 20% of them. Some places it's probably more where it's a high density. But if they don't stay, they will make their way back and they'll come and live with mom in that matriarchal group that I kind of described under that rose petal hypothesis. And that's so the rose petal hypothesis suggests that these matriarchal groups will expand slowly and slowly in increasing concentric circles. But ultimately, there's these little pathways through these neighborhoods. This shows it actually really good. Down here, there's these unintended kind of causeways. Any of these riparian areas, when I was driving through town, there's a few little, appropriately so, it shouldn't be built on, it's a stream, but deer will follow those pathways, and then eventually they'll just find somewhere that they can bed, and they'll get increasingly comfortable, and they'll just expand naturally. So I would say yes and no. Yes, it's depleted and they're desperate, but like I said, deer will have extremely subtle changes in their home range size even when they're starving, they're more likely to stay and starve than go 2 miles and find food. So the changes, this kind of encroachment into like exurbia, I would describe this as, I think are slowly happening with time, and year after year, it's just a slow, progression. So, I'm gonna we can come back to you. So, we'll just try to get to the most number of people. Sure.
Actually, I was just mentioning, you have to start with the plan.
Yeah.
Because it's only again this year,
Mm-hmm.
and now they're using low arrows,
Mm-hmm.
then, I don't think we should ever get into this at all, but, is that actually a preferred method?
So they have slightly larger property sizes than here, and so it's all occurring on private properties who volunteer. And so I think it's probably plausible that there's some number of properties that could potentially support it, but I think it's more challenging in this town than it is in other towns. Now, you could, would I recommend closing the park seasonally for like a week at a time and doing some amount of managed hunting? Probably I would, because that's an area that would be appropriate for that. But it comes with a lot of pushback, and a lot of residents won't be interested in that. And that won't actually solve a township-wide issue. That's addressing a local deer population, a local matriarchal group, if we're talking about the issue in that way. But really, you need, where there are deer, you need management. And so, in all honesty, in a lot of these places, in these more densely populated towns like yours, where the property sizes are what? Anyone know their property size? So we're talking feet? Okay, so we're not even talking acres. Okay, so most people in this room are imagining somebody in a tree stand behind their house, probably not. So, the conversation is difficult. We are, experts in this, and we will provide consultation if that's a route that the town wanted to go. But it would be probably, you're talking about contractors doing alternative methods, for removing deer, in a town like this. So, again, that's a longer conversation. I have a whole presentation about management of deer populations. This is more mitigation focused. But do I, as a biologist of deer, expect that this issue can be resolved by mitigation? My answer is no. It is about either taking action on the population or learning to live with them a little bit. And probably probably I would recommend both. You have a question?
Yeah, so the topic of learning to live with them.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I picked up in your presentation is they're getting very comfortable with humans,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if I think about it, 4 years ago, they were running on site. They don't move.
Mm-hmm.
They are just very, very comfortable. And so it makes me wonder, should I be scared, right? How would I know if they're sick?
Mm-hmm.
How would I know when I'm in danger? I go walking every morning.
Yeah.
5:45. It's 6:45, and I run into I don't know if that's just something like that time.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of them.
That's when they're the most active.
And they are not here. And
Mm-hmm. So a good rule of thumb with wildlife, if it's looking at you, it's thinking about you. That's a good rule of thumb. So if it's looking at you, if it's got its head up, standing still, sometimes they're stomping their foot, it means that they're aware of you. Sometimes they're wagging their tail.
Versus me walking and running, because when I'm running and I
Mhm.
see them, I'm stopped. Right, but I feel like they're looking at me, I'm looking at them.
Yeah.
The other day, someone was following me for 5 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just.
Yeah, so that one's probably being fed. There's no reason a deer would follow you unless it's being fed. So I would just,
They're just very comfortable, is the point.
Yeah, am I saying that you should be scared of all these deer? I don't think that's what I want to say. You should probably not keep your back turned consistently to them, because they're wildlife and we can't predict their behavior. And like Megan said and I said before, there's multiple instances where they've attacked people. So can it happen? Absolutely. But statistically, it's a low probability of one attacking you, but it's these instances where people feed them and they're well habituated that it's increasingly likely. So would I keep my back turned to one for an extended period of time? No, I wouldn't. If I was, and again, I spend a lot of time around deer, and I guess everyone here does too. You kind of get a feel for what an average deer, how it will behave. But I'd say if it's paying attention to you, you should probably pay a little bit of attention to it. I wouldn't be like sweating or worried or like go hide in my car until it leaves. That's not what I would do. Just be aware of it.
And just like Brian said, I've just learned the signs of a deer in distress. So like the tail flipping up or the stopping, they'll snort. Mom with baby is going to be a little bit angrier than, or like, I don't know, angrier, more aware of you than, you know, a doe or a buck without, well, not around your kids, but you know what I'm saying. So during the spring and stuff, when mom was a baby, that's when I would be a little bit more vigilant. But if the tail's pushing, they kind of know that you're there, and they might be listening to you, but like if they're just eating and minding their own business, then you can just carry on and mind your own business. If they start snorting, hardcore eye contact,
And
not gonna be.
if they start walking at you, obviously running at you, everyone's going to be alarmed. But if they start walking at you, definitely be aware. Don't turn your back to that animal.
The other thing that
Yeah.
Sometimes that's another situation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they can get a kind of full, right, too.
That's a fault.
The other thing you can do is carry a little air horn.
But then, so scaring, we almost can't recommend scaring like we might recommend scaring wildlife in other areas. Yeah, if you're threatened, if you feel like you're threatened by your life, but then if you start scaring deer, like if you want to like haze them to get them out of your garden,
That's
in
a
such a,
different story.
it's just a congested
Right.
area, there's a good chance you could cause a car accident by scaring it into the road or something. So often we would recommend hazing of certain wildlife by like air horns and whatever. I'd say do it if your life is threatened, but you know, there's unintended consequences with a lot of these things.
Like last ditch resort type of thing.
Yeah.
Well, I do think that, like, your presentation is very insightful. There's some, like, narratives about deer that, like, are inaccurate, like, oh, they never harm humans, like,
Mhm.
yeah, not true.
Yeah, no.
Or feeding them is contributing to them feeling more comfortable.
Mhm.
I think just from a town perspective, we might need to create more educational awareness around how we cope with them, like, how we live with them, and feeding them and, well,
Feeding them is just, it can't happen, really, in a place like this.
Like, that was the
Yeah.
reason why, because I was like, I don't understand how, like, why they're so comfortable with them.
Yeah, and, you know, it's not healthy for the deer. They're not like living great lives here. Can they exist here? Yes, but I mean, are they living like their best lives? I would argue no. Usually, their fitness is really reduced in these areas. So like, they're just not putting on the amount of body fat. If we ever had a harsh winter up here, and I don't like doing like the scare tactics. That's not my intention. I'm just trying to provide context and thought. But if like Bergen County ever had a harsh winter again, I expect that these deer are not putting on sufficient fat reserves to survive like a harsh winter, because they're struggling to find food if they're not being fed or people aren't replanting their hostas annually. So, sure, a question in the back?
I hear people say that deer live like by habit, you know? So like,
Mm-hmm.
my yard,
Yes.
they keep on coming back to my yard, they love my yard.
Yeah.
So like for a month, I don't see them, and then after a month, I see them again, sometimes we home. So what I do is I shoot them away, or I run after them, and they jump over my next neighbor.
Yeah. I can't, yeah.
Coming back, so what I've been doing, if I plant something, I put up the green fence
Mm-hmm.
around my plant.
Yep. That's a good idea.
I'm putting all of that all the time, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it will be exhaustive to keep doing this because again, they're going to try to meet those nutritional requirements no matter what.
To put a fence, but you're not allowed to put a 6-foot fence in front of your
Right. Right. And yeah, I mean, we don't really have like a position weighing in on that other than if you scale that up, it will be pretty ridiculous if everyone had 6-foot fence, 8 feet, and it needs to be 8 feet, it can't be 6 foot. If everyone had that, one, it would just look a little ridiculous, but two, from an animal welfare standpoint, you're restricting them from portions of their range, and the more people that fence, the more likely are the deer that are existing there are to suffer complications of malnutrition. That's just, they need to eat, and you're excluding them from their range. Sure.
So, Brian, you talked about animal management.
Mm-hmm. Accidentally. I only intended to do a little bit.
Well, we're interested in that because I think the town is to a point where you're living with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been quite a few years now.
Mm-hmm.
And is that something that your department oversees?
Yeah.
Help a borough
Mhm.
formulate some sort of a plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So then I could speak to that real quick, and I'll take more of your thoughts on it. But, so, currently there's a handful of initiatives occurring between multiple boroughs, forming cooperatives together. So the Northwest, like kind of 14 boroughs in the Northwest, are currently undergoing an investigation and thought about it. They got a grant from us collectively to do population surveys. And I do think with complex deer human issues like you guys are having, where traditional management that we, like, you know, other parts of the state, I'm not getting invited to, like, just like middle of Hunterdon County, they're doing their thing. It's pretty easy for them because they have sufficiently large property sizes and they have sufficient amounts of public land, farms, where people have access to deer. So if they're having deer issues, they just go hunt and that's it. They can feed their family and it's a pretty easy issue. And it's also culturally, it's just normal. We've been living in Bergen County, or you have been living in Bergen County for, you know, some 75, 100 and plus years, where hunting has not occurred, like, at all. I have a friend that grew up, he's 86 years old. He grew up, like, hunting, what's it called? Grouse, in Woodbridge Township. Grouse are, like, you know, we hardly have any in New Jersey. They require, like, big tracts of land. Anyways, times have changed dramatically, like that one GIF have shown. I would say that I would recommend contacting your neighboring municipalities and try to start conversations about partnerships, because there's challenges in doing it by yourself, and we will provide as much consultation as we possibly can to your borough because they're site-specific. But engaging in these partnerships with neighboring municipalities, I think, is a really logical solution when the deer problem is very complex right now, and widely distributed across the county, so.
But we could definitely come do the management as well.
Yeah.
Usually do some voluntary review. But
Yeah.
we could definitely come do the management presentation, which is a different, you know, conversation as a whole, but I mean, I think it's important. And we can also come do, like, regular public meetings, education, those types of things. We're used to getting yelled at, so, like, we're totally willing to come and take the heat and do the education and answer the hard questions and do all of that.
Yeah, she's kind of alluring to, like, it attracts, once you start talking about, if you're talking at all about a potential for lethally managing wildlife, you're attracting some people that are going to be ethically opposed to that. Yeah, so, and right, like, they are entitled to their opinion, and we respect, and we want to encourage them to come out and express that opinion. But the reality is that lethal management of deer is currently, like, the way that deer populations are managed. We don't really have alternatives right now. So that's essentially the conversation, and that's kind of what Megan's alluring to. But basically, my other presentation is I talked through basically why lethal management is a recommendation that we make, so that at least the council and mayor and whatnot, everyone understands why we're telling them that some form of lethal management or is appropriate. And so, yeah, we talk about the options. But anyways, yes, we're the people that do that. We oversee all deer management throughout the state. Yep.
So you would oversee the actual event?
We would provide consultation and feedback and help you with the plan, but ultimately, and I would say that this potentially is a frustrating position that we could take. I could empathize with you that this might sound frustrating, but from the state's position, we have a perfectly functioning lethal management program statewide with our hunting program. Towns that have reached such levels of built out, you know, people have inadvertently been making wildlife management decisions based on changing the landscape for years and years and years. It's just it's why we have rats and stuff. And so, you know, as a state, we're not able to provide funding to every town that built out, what I would argue, too much or in ways that don't allow for wildlife management to occur in traditional ways. And so Most of the financial burden, if that's what you're alluding to, is essentially, yeah. But we wouldn't like come do it. We would provide consultation. We would tell you what neighboring municipalities are doing that have successful programs. We would tell you what we think works, what we think is a bad idea. And as much of the conversation as you want to include us in on, we'd be happy to do that.
Fertility, controlling the fertility.
Yeah. So again, like a whole other conversation, but essentially, fertility control, it can work on a closed population, so like an island. But when you have immigration, as soon as the population descends to a noticeably reduced population size, you're really dealing with immigration because deer in higher populations nearby are flooding in. Now, Staten Island is probably the largest experiment for fertility control that's been done, and it's honestly a real shame that they did it in a pretty bad way, which was on bucks. It makes no sense. That's a longer conversation, but anyways, they're like $7 million in, and most of their like negative interactions with deer are at the same level or higher than they were. They have seen like a slight reduction, but it's, several $1 million in Staten Island. If you were to say that you wanted to do fertility control throughout all of these regions in Bergen County, as a municipality, you're talking several hundreds of thousands of dollars, at least in the first 10 years, and it's a sustained effort, because you have to capture every single doe. So it's, again, if you're going to capture them, which you'd have to do to sterilize them, we would recommend euthanizing them, because why would you put a deer back on the landscape? You're already starting from kind of a backwards position if you're releasing deer back out. So, again, we have a whole presentation about it. There's a lot of, good science and biology why it doesn't really work. We have one potential plan that maybe down the road we might approve out of Princeton Township. They keep trying to apply, and they're increasingly getting they're getting better and better applications, but it's still a far cry from what we would accept in terms of a plan that would have potential even for success. But maybe soon we'll have a new fertility control experiment occurring in New Jersey. The last one was chemicals. This one would be surgical sterilization. Anyways.
I have
Sure.
a question about the deer. You talked about the rosebud and the pedigree. What is their range?
Yeah, so in a suburban habitat, I think a good average home range of an individual white-tailed deer is about 1/10 of a square mile. So that's important because a really small home range for an animal that out in like upstate New York, it would be 10 miles, 15 miles. But in suburbia, they're existing in extremely small areas. And so that means that you can't just expect that the deer down here in this woodlot, that all the deer in town go back and visit this woodlot at some point in the year. Probably a lot of these deer up here never have even heard of this woodlot, which is a funny way to say that, but I went for it. So management needs to occur on pretty local levels, and spatially, you need to go where the deer are because of that extremely small home range. So that's why just having a hunt in this woodlot, it would certainly help. It would probably dramatically improve the health of that forest if they did. This is a different town, but you get one. Just using it as a proxy because I have a nice map. It would help a lot if they did a hunt just there, but the residents up here would not be seeing any relief just because this was managed. Does that make sense?
I was going to say then, perhaps then we're at a point where we need more public education about it. And awareness, and not to feel funny about saying, hey, you're feeding the deer, and can we send the health inspector over?
Sure.
Would that be?
Yeah, we'll continue to come back. Yeah.
You don't just go from this.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
Especially because it can be a touchy topic.
Oh,
So like,
it's already,
yeah, so it's definitely like, we want to make sure everybody has all the information that they need before any decisions are made, and we're more than happy to come do the education, help put together, you know, pamphlets or whatever, or that's, yeah, it definitely.
What about in the schools too? Like, do you guys go to the schools to
We don't-
get children?
Yeah, we don't currently have a program like that in place, though it could be useful, but the reality is that, you know, it's their parents that are causing the issues. It's not really the kids, and the kids can't vote. So, we offer a lot of opportunities to try to get kids outside, which I think is probably the most important thing for Bergen County kids, in my opinion, because, you know, people are, like, being raised where, like, meat comes from a bag. Like, that's a strange thing 200 years ago. That's an extremely strange concept to think that your food comes from a plastic bag. It didn't even exist at the time. So people used to have very local, intimate relationships with their food, and therefore with the wildlife around them. And so people in Bergen County, that kind of like last slide that I had, I would largely think that people are considering the deer either as a pest or as a pet. Probably not many people are thinking about them any differently than those two things. Either they're my pet and I feed them, or they're a pest, I can't get them out of my yard. And so this is not like a historically normal context for humans to be interacting with this animal in this way. So I agree that if we had the staff time, we would go out to the schools. You know, we've been staffing the county fairs, which Bergen County doesn't have a farm fair because there's no farms. But we've been staffing those and, you know, interfacing with a lot of youth that way. But that's a, you know, huge, enormous conversation from like a lot of avenues and a lot of issues. So, yeah. Yeah, sure.
how expensive would it be for the county to spray the Lyme ticks?
That's a great question. I did recently look at some of those rates. It's more. I don't have it on the top of my head, so I don't want to lie and accidentally say something that's not true. It's pretty expensive, and you're talking about spraying pesticides, you know, around. And so people who have pets and stuff like that, you know, we already do some scale of that for mosquitoes, so I'm not going to say that, like, the state would never do something like that or allow something like that. We do, like, EPA, and I think it's EPA, does have products that are approved for that. I could, if you send an email to me, I could come up with estimates. There are studies that have, like, quantified that, like spraying versus doing deer management.
You know, even reimbursing, you know, we spray for Lyme ticks. And, you know, it's not cheap.
Yeah.
Couldn't the county reimburse us something? Because we spray, you know, my neighbor doesn't want to spray, that's fine. But I'm not going outside.
Yeah.
And because I've got deer laying on my lawn,
Right.
and I don't want to take that chance.
Well, I think that's wise to protect yourself and your loved ones. I think that's wise. That's a political question that you'd have to take up, probably first with your borough. The chance of the county, you know, like getting the county's attention on that and then agreeing to, you know, turn your tax dollars back that way. I find it pretty unlikely, you know, but you could try. I'd say, why not try? Get some money back.
You're right. Because
Yeah.
it's expensive, it's not, you know, it's not, my
Yeah.
husband always complains
Yeah.
that I insist on, heck with the mosquitoes.
Mm-hmm. So the study that I have in the back of my mind is a study looked at, is it cheaper to treat for ticks or is it cheaper to reduce the deer population? And it depended on the methodology of reducing the deer population, but lethal management was cheaper than treating for ticks to actually achieve a change in the tick population. We could say harvesting, but there's, you know, yeah. I also don't want to sugarcoat anything either. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
What about the geese population? Like, are geese attracted to the geese? Like,
Yeah, they'll get,
carriers?
geese will get ticks, yeah. As far as like a population scale impact with geese and ticks, again, I don't know that there's a lot of context historically because geese were not existing in the summer in New Jersey, existing year-round, I should say. I'm going to mess up my biology a little bit, but historically, they did not exist year-round in New Jersey. We've changed landscapes. Really, like mowing right up to the edge of ponds just created essentially like tundra habitat that just made a number of geese, increasing numbers. So this is actually like this geese problem that we have. I saw them on your baseball field coming in. It's kind of new. So I don't think ticks and geese had a huge history with one another, to the best of my knowledge. Yes. Yeah, I have personally seen that. I used to work with geese. My first job out of college was working with geese. And now I'm working with deer. I like deer more. Sure.
Councilwoman Duffy with the discussion about any controls for hunting and so forth. First thing would be, you folks do a remote sensing, photography of the whole town to indicate where the populations are, the densities and the numbers?
Yeah, I think that's the most helpful part of doing a drone survey is seeing the spatial distribution. So, like nonprofits will do it for quite cheap. So, like this can be done for less than a few $1,000s. For your
That's a start, because you have to know what you're starting out.
Yeah, I will say that, like, you won't find a state that says that it's a must to get started, because, again, you can assess that there's a deer problem just based on the deer vehicle collision numbers, all of the complaints from residences. Measuring it isn't going to, have an impact on how much people tolerate it. That being said, a map like this, I can use a map like this and say, all right, we need to figure out some management in these neighborhoods. There's these stream corridors that seem to be having an impact, and like obviously this woodlot, I didn't need to have that shown. You could also just drive around and like just note where you saw deer, or send like a message out and say, hey, if you had deer on your backyard, just send your address or something. That's going to take a lot of work, but you get what I mean. There's different ways to measure it, and you almost don't have to measure it just to know that there's a problem, but it can be helpful to see the distribution.
The other data that could be available too is, I used to work for the DPW, we used to have to pick up, the animals sometimes. So, between that and maybe police reports on how many accidents.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an important thing. That would be interesting.
Mhm.
And
But
also
it's
the
low,
DPW.
it's surprising.
It's low?
It's low.
That's great. Probably because of the low speed
Yeah,
limits.
it's probably because it's like, most of the
No,
time it's 25.
Yeah, what's it on the order, like 20? Oh, 3, wow, that's very low. Wow,
Yeah.
okay.
It's really low.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing. Yeah, keep your head on a swivel.
The other thing that I wanted to mention is people forgetting the other issue, or what goes hand in hand with wildlife management as far as resource management. We're limited on the amount of woods and timber stands we have, and one works off the other. It's a balancing, project. The more deer, the less understory, the trees, the forests, and so forth.
So we have to have trees too.
We are losing the trees.
Trees.
Okay, what's left in the forest, certainly the timber stands around here in Newbridge and down by the DPW, by the swim club, are the older generation trees.
Mhm.
Okay, as they get old, hard rock and so forth, they fall over. If you don't have an understory, that's the next generation forest. So that's wiped out. And we're going to end up with more erosion, lack of flood control, because there's less trees and so forth.
Yep.
Now, if you, the state of New Jersey, some areas they fenced off, I forget how many acres, for 25 years. And the natural species were reintroduced, came back by burns, the maples, the grovelands, and so forth. And they have a mixed bag of other species that came in. And that's a healthy, thriving forest. That's what we need for our deers. The walk through the forest, it shouldn't be like going to Vansville Park. That's a dying forest.
Right. Yeah, I'll just say that, like, I agree with that, but I do think that it's worth, contesting it just a little bit, that it is certainly a lower priority for this municipality. I don't think that, in all reality, that even if we made all of Bergen County woodlots, like, very healthy, that we're, like, suddenly combating climate change to a significant degree. Those are extremely important. The plant life dramatically affects the insect life, and that dramatically affects the bird life. And so if you like watching birds as I do, these are like really important like national issues. We're seeing annual declines in massive numbers of songbird species. It's directly tied to habitat, pesticide application, unfortunately, killing other insects by bykill. So there's a lot of problems. Tree planting, the tree tubes, I think, are probably important because the reality is if all you did was remove all of the deer, right now what you would get are invasive species coming up. That you need like years, like you said, of that rejuvenation coming back. You can't just take an unhealthy forest, kill all the deer, and then suddenly a healthy forest pops up. It takes management and it takes work. So I agree, but I also just want to like kind of point out that like for this municipality, I didn't focus on it for a reason. You have one woodlot basically, and those stream corridors, which I do think are like opportunities for mitigation and whatever. But I recommend doing the tree plantings. Those are really great things if you care about your local birds coming through during spring migration and whatnot. But the reality is that we're not living in Sussex County here. We're in Bergen County. Just being real, yeah.
Small lots.
Yeah, sure, whatever.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And we would love to have you back.
Sure. Yeah. Just let us know when.
Say thank you, everybody. We learned something.
Yeah.
And it's